Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 617 for December 30th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, and Happy New Year. We hope everyone had
That's
a
right,
great
2025,
New
baby.
Year's Day. Yeah, the date that I ended up giving there is when we record this. That's usually when I offer up those dates. But when this is released, it will be 2025. So we hope everyone had a great New Year's, celebrating and watching the Michigan Wolverines beat Alabama or lost to Alabama. And depending on what happens, that's how I'll edit this.
I was going to say, I feel like there's a little unpredictability there.
Yeah,
Not sure
I have no idea.
Not sure what to say about Penn State and Boise. We'll see how that goes, too.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. But we do hope everyone had a great New Year's. This is the last episode, again, as we are recording, of 2024. And to reiterate, for those that may have missed last week or the last couple of weeks, our award show, our InSession Film Awards show, is going to be episode 619. So that is 2 weeks. In 2 weeks will be the InSession Film Awards. Next week on the show, we are going to be doing best scenes of 2024. So that will be our kind of a last, it'll be the last episode before we get to the award show. So this week we have more homework. It's going to be very, very similar to last week's show.
Yep, very rapid fire.
We have a ton of movies to get into. We have some documentaries, some foreign language films, and even a Paul Schrader that we're going to get into here. Now, before we get to the movies, usually we start off with some box office talk. Maybe we can get to that briefly. But I want to open the show this week with story time, because this week we had 2 reviews come out. We had A Complete Unknown come out. Brendan and I did that conversation that was released yesterday as this one is released. And then earlier in the week, we had a conversation on Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. Yeah. And I was joined by the great Will Bjarnar. Now, if you follow us on social media, you might be confused by that, because I had noted that we were going to be joined by the great Wonder Meg, who recently joined us for Night Bitch and a few others earlier in the year. And it was going to be a really exciting show because, one, it's Nosferatu, one of the bigger films of the year, and it was Robert Eggers, who we are big fans of, so there was a lot to look forward to. However, if you listen to the episode, you will have noticed that Meg was not there and Brendan was not on that show. Brendan, as we have joked a couple of times now, succumbed to the darkness. He had a temperature of 104, which means he was not joining us for that conversation. He was
as you mentioned many times, JD, the rats got me.
The rats got me. Yes.
I got the Black Plague. I suffered the Black Plague.
The plague. He was down and out for the Count Orlok, so he was not able to be there.
Trying to grow the mustache even more.
He's got the Orlok aesthetic going. Yeah,
I can pull off my own Orlok.
I do like it. So Brendan wasn't able to be there, and I knew that a couple of hours ahead of time that he was going to be gone. Okay, no problem. Meg is joining us. It'll be fine. It'll just be her and I. Well, I get a message from Meg about an hour before we were supposed to record, and she has a family emergency. So she has to back out. Now, thankfully, everything is okay, but she unfortunately had to back out, understandably had to go. So an hour before we were supposed to record, it's getting late into the evening. I am now scrambling because of the schedule of this week. That was the only time I was going to be able to do Nosferatu. Yeah. So I am, scouring the communication channels, trying to figure out who I can get to come on the show. And now if you listen to our Nosferatu episode, you'll know how I ended up getting Will on the show. I got a text from Dave Giannino who recommended that I reach out to Will. I did, and then he comes on to do the show with me. So, and all of the scurrying and all of the chaos, we were able to land someone to do the review with me. Okay.
Yep.
So then Will and I go to get on the show to do the recording. And immediately as we get on the StreamYard to do the episode, immediate technical issues. I cannot hear Will. He can hear me. I cannot hear him. So it appears that the episode is cursed. Like there's just no way that this is happening.
Why is it that every time I can't make an episode, something happens technically?
I don't
like
know.
apparently I'm the one that's cursing our episodes in that regard.
It was.
I mean, I wasn't the only one that suffered the Black Plague. Apparently technology
No,
did
the
that
plague
day,
was
too.
everywhere.
Yeah.
The rats were eating the machines and the wires. I don't know what was happening, but I could not hear Will. So we spent, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes trying to figure it out. Is it something on his end? Is it something on my end? And came to the conclusion that my little one, my 2-year-old, was in here pressing buttons, and I did not know it at the time until I was studying everything and figuring it out, and then realized that Andrew was in here pressing buttons. So I was able to figure it out. We could hear each other. We could go to do the episode.
First off, can I just comment on that? Monkey see, monkey do, because wasn't that something Sam did a lot when he was 2 years old?
I mean, it would have been a little bit different because my setup is different from when Sam was little, but sure, Sam would like to press buttons on the computer and stuff as well.
Yeah, because I think I remember you telling me stories about how Sam would very deliberately mess with your settings, and now here's Andrew probably watching how you do things, and he's like, I want to be like Dad, so I'm going to start pressing buttons. And
also, my shiny new control board that I got a few years ago has a lot lot of colors on it. So he is attracted to the colors.
That's a child's
so loves to press on the buttons and watch the colors go. Yeah. Okay. So that ended up being the issue. So we did the recording, and then I go to edit, and I realize that in the chaos, some of my settings got messed up. And so the video is continued, like the curse has continued because the audio and the video is all messed up. It's not good at all.
Count Orlok continues to haunt.
Orlok just continues to haunt me for this episode. Now, here's some fun little irony, and this is some inside baseball, but it's a fun little twist to the narrative here. So I did my best to edit the original video as it was, and that was the initial video that ended up going up to YouTube when we launched the show earlier in the day. However, I was sitting here thinking to myself, maybe there's a way to remedy the audio. Because I record all of the audio locally as well as through the video. So I have a backup audio, a crisper, cleaner audio that you can always go to here on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you want to listen to the audio version of the podcast. So that is available. I had that. And now when I record the audio, I record my audio individually. What you're hearing now, that's all recorded individually. Yeah. And then I have a track that records everything. So me and Brendan together. Now, for whatever reason, I still don't know. I cannot figure it out. For months and months and months, the together track on my computer has always corrupted. I don't know why, but it's always corrupted and it's never been usable. But my individual track always works fine, so it doesn't matter because Brennan sends me his audio separately. I can edit. Everything's great. No problem. However, in this one instance, I still don't know. Orlok pulling magic out of a hat. Because in this one instance, the together track for Will and I, it worked. It did not corrupt. I don't know how it happened.
Then it was, but it worked
great.
So you succumb to the darkness, and then by the end, you succumb to the light.
Succumb to the light. So I was able to take the together track and replace that with the original video audio. And so now I was able to re-upload the video, and the audio is much cleaner and much better. It's not entirely perfect. If you look closely, Will's audio and visual is about half a second off, maybe not quite. It's a little off, not terribly, but just a little off. And I couldn't fix that. There was nothing I could do to.
It's not enough to cause a distraction.
No,
at least I didn't think
it's
it was.
fine. It's much better than the first version.
Yeah, I thought you did a good job remedying it.
I appreciate it. So yeah, it was just crazy. All of these twists and turns just to get that one episode out. It was wild.
Hey, it was a worthwhile episode. Yeah, wish I could have been.
It was
there,
a great conversation.
It was a worthwhile episode.
It was fun. So Nosferatu, please go and listen to that review or watch it here on YouTube. However you're partaking in the show, I would really appreciate it because there was a lot of work that went into making that episode available. So
yeah, listen to it, please. Will's a good dude.
Go and check it out. Yeah, we had fun talking about that movie. All right. Before we get to the movies, I don't want to spend too much. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because obviously we have a lot of movies to get to.
Yeah.
But quickly we can go ahead and talk about the box office. It was Christmas after all this last week, so we do need to get into the box office. What do you think was number one, Brendan?
I'm gonna guess Mufasa.
You would be awfully close. And that is really interesting, right? Because we've had a couple of these examples throughout the year where they start off slow and then amazing comeback.
That's what I thought was going to happen because we sort of talked about this, at least given the dynamic between Mufasa and Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I kind of wondered if Sonic was going to be one of those initial heavy hitters, but maybe Mufasa was going to find more of an audience.
Yeah.
So I do wonder, I'm guessing since Mufasa was not number one, it was probably still Sonic the Hedgehog 3.
Yes.
But I'm going to guess the disparity between them was maybe a little bit tighter.
It is very tight.
Okay.
Very tight. We're talking about $200,000. So Sonic
might
the
as well
Hedgehog,
be a tie. That might as well be a tie.
Might as well be a tie. Yeah, so Sonic comes in at number one with 37. And Mufasa comes in with 36.8. So it was crazy. Now, those numbers are very tight. To your point, it essentially is a tie. What's really interesting, though, is that Sonic, and both of these are in their second weekend, right?
Yeah.
Sonic has a 38.4% drop, which isn't terrible. That's not a terrible drop.
That's a decent hold.
But still a drop nonetheless. Mufasa is up 4%. It increased 4% on its second week, which is just crazy.
Which is something we sort of, I don't want to say we speculated, but we talked about the possibility of that happening and whether we should be calling Mufasa a failure for Disney as of yet. It was definitely too early to tell. Some people were claiming that just after its opening weekend, but we've seen films have disastrous opening weekends only to have legs later and actually make their money back. Maybe Mufasa is one of those, and maybe we can actually feel happy that Barry Jenkins can fund his next masterpiece.
Yeah, I don't know how much they spent in marketing. We talked about how the budget for that film was around $200 million.
Yeah.
And with marketing, you have to imagine that it needs to double that to make its profit back. If it continues to have legs, as bleak as it looked last week, the film might be able to get to even. It might not be profitable, but it might get close to even. And you're absolutely right. We did talk about this last week. And I think what happened here is that for Christmas, you have a bunch of different movies that is counter programming, right? You have Baby Girl, A Complete Unknown, The Fire Inside, Nosferatu. 4 very different films. So 4 films not really competing with each other, except for adults who would be interested in those very different type of movies. But they're certainly not competing with Mufasa and Sonic. And I think ultimately what happened here is that families went to see Sonic the first week and then they went to see Mufasa the second week.
I think that's what happened. I think that's absolutely right. Yeah.
So it makes sense that you would have this massive drop for Mufasa, and then you get the dip for Sonic and Mufasa rises all of a sudden. So it's like, I think it's as simple as that. And ultimately why both films are at least have the potential to have a success story here. Because Mufasa worldwide, domestically it's at 113, but you include the international numbers and it's at 327.5 worldwide. again, with the 200 plus another 200-ish. Again, we don't know the exact figures for marketing, but
yeah,
let's say if the figure is to double your budget to break even, it's on its way. Mufasa, it's on its way to potentially getting there.
Yeah,
but we'll see.
We'll see. We still have more holiday to get through with New Year's, which is not really, a movie-going holiday as Christmas or even Thanksgiving are. But we'll see if Mufasa has some legs come early 2025. Because I would love to see Barry Jenkins get his flowers.
Yeah. No, I would as well. I would absolutely love to see that as well. And then there's this little film called Nosferatu.
Never heard of it.
Has done very, very well. It is Robert Eggers' best opening to date. The film is currently at 43 million worldwide. It hasn't released too much internationally yet. Domestically, sitting at 40 million. Did very well.
With a budget of around 50 million, I think. So that's a great early start. And I think already, if I'm not mistaken, it's actually one of the highest grossing horror films of the year at this point.
Yeah.
Just given that early success.
Yep. $11.5 million on Christmas Day, on its opening day for Christmas. And
I mean, it is a Christmas movie, so it kind of makes sense.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm not kidding when I say that. It absolutely is a Christmas movie.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And through those 5 days, as I noted, it's up to 40.8. So yeah, it's doing very well. This is going to be a profitable movie unless there's just a massive drop off. I don't foresee that being the case.
Yeah, I don't know. I hope not.
I hope not as well. I do think that Nosferatu is going to do really well for Focus Features here. So, so that's really nice. And then again, I think it's because of the Christmas season, families going to the movies more, kids are away from school. Obviously, Christmas is such a huge, huge day for theaters. Wicked and Moana 2 in their 6th and 5th weekends, respectively, both of those films were up. And by a significant amount. Wicked was up 39%, Moana 2 up 43% from the previous week.
Yep.
So it's doing well.
Those
films are doing well.
Movies
and then
are good.
You have a little film called The Complete Unknown coming in with 23 million domestically so far, 11.6 on Christmas as well.
Okay.
So similar opening day numbers to Nosferatu, but hasn't had nearly the legs as Nosferatu.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
I guess the coldness of Nosferatu really brought people in for the Christmas season, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it is a Christmas movie. Didn't really market itself as a Christmas movie, but you go and see it. It absolutely is a Christmas movie.
Yeah. People love their lustful vampires. And
I mean,
Christmas like lustful vampires.
I mean, I don't know how it is in your household when it comes to Christmas, but I mean, in many households, it's probably very blood-sucking, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
A lot of blood-sucking going on these days. Yeah. So anyway, that is the box office for this week. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about in the coming weeks, but some interesting narratives for sure. There's no doubt about that. And the holidays being such a big part of the American culture, it was great to see that those numbers very much improved for a lot of these films, or they opened very well. So yeah, the parade is on. We weren't sure last week, but it's definitely on now. So
the Christmas parade is happening.
It is happening. All right, we have a bunch of films we need to get to, so let's go ahead and transition to these catch-up discussions. Let's talk about some documentaries. There's been a couple of documentaries that have garnered a lot of praise. We have finally caught up with them, so let's talk about them. The first film is No Other Land. And this is a documentary that, as of this recording, unless I miss something huge, it still has no distribution here in the United States.
Which is really weird, especially considering for many people, it's the best documentary that's going to be nominated for many awards in that category.
Yep, it was shortlisted for the Academy. It's already won a ton of Best Documentary awards from critics groups across the country. This is directed by, and forgive me for butchering these names, Basil Adra, Hamdan Bilal, Yuval Abraham, and Rachel Zor. which is a collaboration of Israel and Palestinian filmmakers.
Yeah.
And it is a documentary that covers a lot of the conflict happening in Palestine.
Yeah.
And it's very powerful. Again, it's a lot of people are saying that this is easily one of the best documentaries of the year and simply one of the best films of the year, period. So as we get into it, Brennan, what did you think about No Other Land?
Yeah, it's absolutely easy to see why people think this is one of the best films of the year, let alone one of the best documentaries of the year. And covering the destruction of the West Bank's Masafer Yatta village, I believe it's called. And it takes place over the course of what I think isn't like 4 or 5 years. I think filming started around the summer of 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's right. Something, yeah, it was certainly pre-COVID.
Yeah. So for a documentary that's only about 90 some minutes long, it took a long time to make, which I think emphasizes the turmoil of this situation and how it was being made. It's one of those films, documentary or not, that feels kind of dangerous to watch. It feels like you're watching the lifting of a confidential curtain that puts you at risk by merely viewing what's behind it. And I really appreciated that. I responded to that. That I think makes it probably the most harrowing and crucial documentary of the year. And I think the mere gesture that it was made by a team of both Israelis and Palestinians, I think demonstrates the importance of cultural unity, which is ultimately the message here. And I think that makes it very powerful. And even the main dynamic that we see on screen between Basil Adra and I'm trying to find his name so I don't butcher it. Uval Abraham. I think it's really the two of them that are most prominently on screen. And there is kind of in a way, you can almost see this as a friendship movie. If you want to overlook just the political conflict of it all, there is a great friendship at play between these two who are very openly on different ends of the religious spectrum. So I like that. I think that really is very profound here. So it is a very good film for sure.
Yeah, I think this is a stunning documentary. I think it is a vital piece of filmmaking as it observes the displacement and the cleansing of Palestinians in the West Bank. It has a ton of conviction to it. They are very eager to capture the harrowing tragedy that is taking place over there at the risk of being arrested, perhaps jailed, killed. And they're not afraid to confront that directly. And they want to do that on camera. They want to document this as bluntly as possible. And it is incredible how they're able to capture the horrors of the injustice as a result. However, to your point, it is also this striking film about the friendship forming between Basil and Yuval, who we have to note is an Israeli journalist.
Yeah.
So it is fascinating how the film is about unity in that regard. The lengths they go to maintain that friendship, to offer some sort of hope within the depths of the darkness, and fighting for your land despite the grim realities around you. Like, there's so much humanity built into that here, and the results are deeply poignant. It is incredible how the film is able to work within that duality, and I find it impeccable. Like, it truly is a stunning piece of filmmaking. So yeah, I do think this is easily one of the best docs of the year, certainly one of the best films of the year, period. And to reiterate the fact that this has no distribution, and we all know why. We all know why this has no distribution, and it's really egregious, really unfortunate.
We need to show dangerous things to people sometimes, and I like how dangerous that this feels. There is footage in here that, let's just say, this is a movie I wouldn't recommend to just everyone. And knowing that this is a documentary, there is there is a reality to that footage, especially with regard to, I'm trying to look up his name so I don't either butcher it or just simply neglect it, but one individual by the name of Harun Abdu Aram. He's the man that gets shot in the neck, and his mother's reaction to that is quite devastating. And the film is very upfront and abrasive with wanting to show that to us. And to also show that mother's reaction. She's interviewed a few times. It's not shying away from that devastation. And it makes for a very uncomfortable experience. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. Sometimes that uncomfortability is a necessity. This film certainly acknowledges that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's one thing, and they do talk about this in a roundabout way, but it is brought up in the film where it's one thing to hear about a conflict, especially when we're afar, because their target audience, they talk about this directly. The target audience for this film is not other Palestinians or anyone in the Middle East. They understand that the conflict is likely not going to be resolved by politics happening there. They want to reach Americans. They want to reach other countries that might be able to have some sort of outside influence on this conflict if they can see the realities of it. That is something that is brought up. So they, as we're talking about, they're very direct in showing the violence and showing the tragedies and observing the displacement that is happening. Because again, it's it's a conversation when you're on a podcast and you're talking about world conflict, and it can easily feel foreign and separate and dislocated. But the footage they offer up here is so visceral and real and tangible and horrific that it brings that to it brings that to a reality that that easily overcomes and overwhelms that separation of just talking about something. So I do love how the film goes about that. And again, I think it is really important that the film goes outside of itself to, to show us that this is a collaborative effort, that it's not just Palestinians that are feeling this way, that there are certain Israelis as well that see this violence, that want to show those realities as well. And I think that unity is so vital here as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right as well, that it's a different influence when you're merely talking about something that's happening that's devastating as opposed to really showing it. It's interesting. There's another movie we'll be talking about on this episode that also utilizes real footage of political turmoil. I won't say what that film is because we'll obviously get to it, but it does so in a way that does add a power to that movie, even if that movie is ultimately fictional by design, even if it's utilizing a real life backdrop to support it. It's this movie, No Other Land, I think is certainly more abrasive and direct in that approach, and certainly the right form for that. Because I think it definitely leaves an impression.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Very good film.
Very, very, very good film. Who knows when this is going to be available? Hopefully it becomes available somewhat soon. If it goes on to win an Oscar, I imagine someone will pick it up.
Oh, absolutely.
However,
I don't know where.
Meantime,
it'll probably find itself on some streaming service, but I don't know where.
Yeah, we don't know where, we don't know when, or what that's going to look like. But be on the lookout for No Other Land. All right, let's continue with documentaries. Let's talk about Soundtrack to a Coup D'ETAT. And this is about the United Nations and a lot of the politics that went into the I guess some of the egregious behavior we saw from certain countries as it relates to the Congo in the 60s and 70s, I believe is when this takes place. I'm trying to recall.
The late 50s into the early 60s.
Late 50s, late 50s into the early 60s.
Yeah.
So it's a very heavy political film. However, it is all interwoven with jazz music and jazz artists and musicians being at the center of this conflict as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible. So, Brendan, what did you think about Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat?
Oh, you know I went for this. You know I absolutely went for this thing.
I would have been shocked if you were like, no, this one's not for me. What?
Yeah, I absolutely ate this up.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I'm a huge fan of jazz music.
Yeah.
But there is something about the merriment of jazz and history that just feels so right, whether it be in this movie or really in anything, because jazz has always had connections to racial discrimination. Or as drummer Max Roach puts it in this movie, we do use the music as a weapon of man's inhumanity towards man. So jazz has always had an influence in that way. And using that music as a parallel to the Congo's quest for independence, I think is kind of a stroke of genius. If anything, Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat, I think, is maybe the best achievement in editing of the year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is not a traditional documentary by any means, which I like. We tend to like documentaries that have more of a uniqueness to them, more of an artistry to them. And director, I hope I'm pronouncing this name right, Johan Grimenprez, what he does here is that he essentially turns this into what kind of feels like a political thriller in the vein of a video essay with jazz music and jazz history. It's kind of like this huge merriment of these three things, and I feel like it works perfectly. And I think in that way, it is one of my this is probably my favorite documentary of the year. I will admit, I think a movie like No Other Land is a more crucial documentary and probably the one that people should seek out first, given the significance of that and how current that it feels nowadays. But Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat was really more up my alley. This was definitely my kind of movie.
Yeah, I certainly did expect that. I noted on last week's show, because I'm still in love with Eibelin. I think that is a phenomenal documentary. I do think No Other Land is the best documentary I've seen this year. Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat is one of the most captivating films I've seen. It is turned out to be quite the year for documentaries, I think.
I think it's a great year for docs. I'm with you.
I did not really anticipate that 3 months ago, but here we are. It's turned out to be really, really good. And what's so compelling about this documentary is that it is ultimately a history lesson.
Yeah.
And it's almost hard to describe because it is so distinct. I don't know if I've seen anything like this where there are no talking heads here. There's no central narrator to walk us through this. There's no history teacher, if you will, but it is a history lesson that is using archival footage and audio as it intersects not just the history of colonialism and the Cold War, but as you were talking about there, jazz music and artists who are heavily involved here. And the editing, the fusion of those two things, I think is incredible.
Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible. I do think there are times, and this is a slight criticism because overall, I love this documentary. It is really, really great. I think at times it does get a little bit lost in that narrative. For example, and I can't recall who it is off the cuff here, but maybe you can help me because it is one of the musicians back in the States who at one point decides that he's going to run for president. And
oh yeah, that's Dizzy Gillespie.
Yeah, that narrative is eventually just dropped randomly.
I like seeing it as a fan of Dizzy's work, but I don't necessarily disagree. It's probably the one moment that doesn't quite have the same level of parallel strength as these other ones. Because when I hear like drummer Max Roach talking, I sense, okay, his history, his influence actually has a lot to say about what's going on in the Congo, even if it isn't directly about the Congo. Hearing songs by Nina Simone, like "Wild Is the Wind," for instance, which I think might be the best needle drop of the whole year. But and again, like that's something that has very little to do with the actual history of the Congo's search for independence, but it actually has a thematic tie to it. I could see where you're coming from with regard to Dizzy's quest for presidency. His campaign.
It feels a little random when so much of this film, when most of the film is about certainly the United States, but specifically how the CIA was involved in terms of these secret missions into the Congo, the United Nations, how they're involved, the actual politics of the Congo itself, the individuals involved.
Yeah.
Now, the jazz parallels are certainly a big part of it, but it felt like that was the one moment where we kind of detoured to talk about him specifically and him running for president. And that in and of itself is a little odd, but also that whole through line, that storyline is just disappears. Like we don't follow through on any of it as the film goes.
We do see his campaign. We do see his campaign commercial come up again randomly, like 30 minutes later. But then that's about it. But I'm not sure how well interwoven it is.
Yeah, it just feels
narrative.
a little. Again, that's a slight criticism to the film. That it just feels like they have so much story to tell that we're just throwing everything at the wall. and look, that's fine. It mostly works. It is a magic trick of a movie. In a lot of ways, it feels like it shouldn't work, and yet it does. It is glorious how impressive it is.
While I don't necessarily disagree on your criticisms regarding Dizzy Gillespie, I do like that we get a lot of history with other jazz artists that may or may not have a direct tie to the Congo's desire for independence. You know, because many of these jazz artists that do have more of a direct tie are those like Abbey Lincoln and Max Roach and Louis Armstrong.
Who goes over there, right?
He goes over there to do a concert there, which happened to just be this like Trojan horse of sorts for the CIA.
Yeah.
He was basically
you think of Trap. How did you not think about Trap during that moment? I'm like, oh my God, this is the inspiration for Trap.
Exactly. Yeah. But even so, as we joke about that, there is something heartbreaking about how a great artist like Louis Armstrong was used in that way. But at the same time, while they're the ones that are more directly tied to this history, we also get some histories with those like Charles Mingus, maybe a little bit with Miles Davis, who may or may not have as much of a direct tie to this particular history, but their music was always fueled by racial discrimination. So the parallels are still there in a thematic way, which I do think is represented here for sure. You can definitely sense that.
Absolutely. And to the title of the film, the soundtrack, the jazz of it all, it does offer something so invigorating to the narrative, the thriller of this being a coup and the political unravelings that we see. It's just fascinating how the soundtrack amplifies so much of that storytelling. Like you're completely glued to the screen.
We need more jazz scores. We really need more straight up jazz scores for movies.
It's great. It's really, really great. I mean, maybe the biggest, and I don't really mean this as a criticism, but perhaps what could be the most overwhelming to this film is just that it is a lot to take in. And there is a lot of story here. Yeah. And a lot of the context of the film comes through writing that we see on screen to kind of help fill in the gaps, which I probably prefer that style than some talking head coming on to the screen in a banal way to inform me of what's happening. Because when that writing does come on, again, it's often infused with the jazz elements of the film. So it's all really, really compelling. I think the musical storytelling is nothing short of astounding.
Yeah, I'm with you. I will admit though, and this might sound like a criticism or even a backhanded compliment because I'm with you that this is a very intense documentary. I did have to take it in 2 sittings. I do think it is. It's overwhelming. It's a lot,
and it's long. It's like 2.5 hours or something like that. So.
Yeah. And I don't always recommend people watch a movie that way. In fact, I rarely ever want to watch a movie that way. But it got to a point where I realized I think I'm going to miss things if I try to stuff this all in one sitting. I need to be in the right headspace consistently, and I don't want to jeopardize my enjoyment of it if I start to feel overwhelmed by the breadth of material here.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly understandable. And typically, like the cinephile, the purity of, cinema in me wants to agree with you that, watching everything in one sitting is always going to be the best case scenario. Watching it in a cinema is likely always going to be the best case scenario. So I like the pretentious cinephile in me is absolutely, completely agree.
Yeah.
The father of two in me is like, I'm watching everything in 2 or 3 sittings.
Yeah.
Like,
so how many sittings did this one take you? Like 7?
Actually, I got through this in one night, believe it or not.
Good for you, man. Good
there
for you.
are others that we'll talk about in this conversation or on this episode where it certainly took me a couple of times for sure.
Okay, that's fair. Well, good for you on this one. But I will say, even though this film, Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat, is very overwhelming, and while there are no talking heads to literalize what's happening here historically, there's enough here to still give you a sense of what's happening. Like, I feel like I still learned something.
For sure. I learned a lot about this event.
Well, I learned a lot about the different perspectives at play as to how the Congo's quest for independence could jeopardize other nations, especially given the lingering threat of the Cold War. How the Soviet Union played a part into that, and how America played a part into that, and how they feared the tensions would rise given how much of the material that created the atomic bomb came from the Congo. So I understand how those fears those are fears that I think are fair. I think actually have a fair bit of merit to them. And despite this not directly telling us about that history, I was able to pick up on all those things. So I think the film is very effective in that regard.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, there's a vibrancy to this film that is quite arresting. So definitely urge people to go and check this one out as well when it becomes available. Let's move on. We have a couple of international films we want to get to. Let's start with the Brazilian film. Is this Brazilian
yes,
film?
I'm Still Here.
Yep. Yeah, I'm Still Here. This is directed by Walter Salles and notably stars Fernando Torres, who has been garnering a lot of attention on the awards circuit this year. And this is another political thriller, not really thriller, but certainly it has politics at the
It's a political
core
drama of a sort.
Political drama.
Yeah.
What did you think about I'm Still Here?
I think it's amazing what a great central performance can do to your film. I think Fernanda Torres is rightfully getting a lot of acclaim for this performance. And she elevates this film to such a degree that I almost forgot how, quote unquote, it's fine the film is itself.
Okay.
I don't love a lot of what Walter Salles' direction is doing here. I think given the devastating material, I wish that maybe the film itself didn't feel as placid, I guess is the word I'm thinking of at the same time. But I do appreciate how the film, and maybe to an extent, Marcelo Rubens Paiva's own memoir, which I admittedly have not read, I guess I appreciate how the film and his memoir maybe aren't really interested in the dictatorial politics that fueled 1970s Rio de Janeiro. It's really more interested in how that outside politicking affects the families within. And, instead focusing more on how a general abusive government can affect these families. So I think by keeping things more domestic, I do appreciate that approach. I guess maybe I wish that the filmmaking was there to better match the beauty of Fernanda Torres' performance. Did I mention how great she is in this? I mean, good God, she's good in this. And I think rightfully earning a lot of accolades, and probably something we'll see more actively represented when it comes to our InSession Film Awards, I'm sure. I think she's great in the film. I think she's certainly better than the film itself. I think the film itself is pretty good, but I think she's amazing in this.
We might have our first agreement of these catch-up episodes. I think this film is pretty great. I don't think it's one of the best films of the year, like this isn't quite in my top 20. However, I don't want to necessarily funnel everything through that prism, although we are at the end of the year, so it's really hard not to have that top of mind. But if I'm to separate end of the year conversation with just the film itself, I do think it is really good. Now, to your point, it begins and ends with Fernanda Torres. She does give arguably one of the very best performances of the year. She is really good, really great here in terms of the resilience and the strength that she denotes while completely unraveling underneath. It is extraordinary what she brings to this role. However, where we do disagree is I actually really quite like the filmmaking here because it is more focused on the domesticity of it. I do love that we avoid the broad political scandal that certainly drives a lot of the actions of the plot, but the film is certainly much more focused on that domesticity and how these characters react to their father missing, or in the case of Torres as Eunice, her husband missing, and eventually missing for days, then weeks, then months. That turns into years. And while they never really know what happened to him, it becomes clear as time goes as to what is really at play. And the camera is always concerned with those reactions, which is what I really do appreciate about the direction here from Walter Salles, because he does a really great job. And there are a couple of films this year where I think the filmmaking may be almost too simple, but so effective in capturing the grief that these characters are going through, because it is all about the camera just capturing the faces of these characters. And I think it does such a great job in that regard. And there's some beauty thrown in terms of one of the daughters having some sort of camera that she utilizes throughout the film, some sort of handheld
those are my favorite visual sequences of the film.
Some of those visuals here are extremely evocative and do a great job. As lush as they are visually, they're also embedded with a deep pathos because of what they ultimately come to represent with that time of their lives and how it is connected to that heartache. So I think the filmmaking is really quite great there. Like it's not going to stand out in oh my God, Robert Eggers, he does it again. That kind of filmmaking, and nothing against Robert Eggers. I love the man. But that kind of vivid detail is so apparent. Like you can see his direction being painted with every brush in a much more brazen way, which again, I love about Eggers. Do not get me wrong. It is much more subtle here, but the camera work, I deeply appreciate because it is actively trying to find the faces of these characters. And there's something about that approach that I think is really fantastic. And it doesn't get bogged down and forgetting that and losing sight of what's really important here. So as these characters are suffering, and especially with Eunice, because there's a elongated sequence where she's in jail herself, and instead of focusing on why she's in jail, when did her daughter get out? Like there's actually storytelling, like plot details that are kind of lost in those moments, because the whole, like that whole series of events is again focusing on her deterioration while she's in prison and showing that to us visually. So some of those plot details are kind of confused, as she would be, because she doesn't really know. Like 3-4 times she asks, like, what day of the week is it? How long have I been here? Like she doesn't really know. So that disorientation, I think, comes through wonderfully in the direction here. Again, not going to end up in my 5 for direction or anything to the sort, but maybe a little underappreciated on the whole.
There is something to be said about a director that knows the strength of their actors and just lets their actors really carry the film in many ways. So I can appreciate that level of restraint. Maybe it's because Fernanda Torres is so good that every time the camera veered away from her, I just wanted to get back to her. And because, outside of, the sequences of her one daughter playing with her own handheld camera, which I do think are visually very great scenes. Whenever we're not focused on Fernanda Torres, I did feel a bit of a disconnect there. The opening shots of them on the beach, I thought there was a jumbled nature to the filmmaking that didn't fully work for me. And then we're introduced to this dog that comes in out of nowhere that becomes adopted by the family. My first thought is, well, this is not going to end well. I think it maybe kind of plays with the tropes a little bit too much. But at the same time, the level of restraint when it's focused on just the actors, in particular Fernanda Torres, I think that's where it's at its best. And thankfully that is most of the movie. So it is perhaps the right approach. Maybe there are just those little pockets where I wish that there was more of a vibrancy to help make up for that lostness when Torres wasn't very much on screen. But at the same time, I do appreciate what you're saying, that when a filmmaker does bring in that level of restraint, that's something we need to acknowledge as well. When we have so many filmmakers that try to be the stars of their own movies, which is something
very much gets out of the way. He
does get out of the way, and there is something to be said about that because we don't often praise directors for doing that.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll just have to agree to disagree about those opening scenes. I think they're really endearing and charming, and I think wonderfully set the table of how connected this family is. And even though Selton Mello's performance is limited, obviously, as Ruben's here, I think it's one of those that is so good that it is felt throughout. Like his ghost kind of lingers, or his missing presence lingers. Like the way he interacts with Eunice, the way he interacts with his children in those early scenes, I think are really endearing, really charming. And when he's gone, it is felt, and it comes through in the supporting performances here, as I noted. So I do like that simplicity, really where this film tailors off for me, because I think it is almost acting as one of the better films of the year until we get to the coda at the end. I think that's where the film kind of stumbles in sticking the landing. I don't think it quite does that. I think it kind of overstays its welcome a little bit, becomes like almost turns into a pseudo documentary at the end. Which
so you mean the actual coda? Because there are two time jumps in the movie.
Both of those time jumps I don't think are necessary.
I will agree with that as well. I think that's a great point. I think there's a moment right before that that first time jump rather, where all of them are in the car leaving somewhere, I'll simply say. That's a great final scene right there.
I agree, especially because it brings in her camera again, right? So there is kind of this lush quality to it, but again, poignant.
There's a bookended quality to that.
Yes, I agree. Like I would have rolled credits there.
Yeah.
Now, sure, the final jumps in time perhaps gives us a little bit more of what really happened narratively that this film had been avoiding to that point. So I guess it offers a little bit more context, but we talked about this a little bit on A Complete Unknown, where that film was trying to avoid cradle to grave, but also became a little too Wikipedia. This is a film that is kind of the opposite in the sense that it mostly avoids that until the end. And then it's like, okay, well, let's throw Wikipedia in here now so we can fill in the audience as to what happened to these guys.
Which is interesting because even though actors are still portraying these roles, the filmmaking style changes to almost look like it was real footage. Like it's a very interesting choice.
Yeah. And one that didn't really work for me.
I can agree with that as well. Yeah, that's a good point.
So, but everything up until then I thought was actually quite flawless. Like I still gave this 4 stars on Letterboxd because I think like up until that last 20 minutes, it's really, really great. And of course, Fernanda Torres is just delivering a performance. Like she's absolutely hammering it home. I just didn't need those codas at the end. They don't really offer anything.
I'm with you.
In my opinion.
Yeah. I ended up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So we're not too far off, even despite our slight disagreements on some of the filmmaking choices here.
Mhm.
I do sometimes wonder if, and I don't mean this as a slight, I think it's just really interesting how some people put certain weights into their rating scales on Letterboxd. I do wonder if our rating
Mhm.
scales are just very different now. I think in many cases, what you see as a 4 out of 5 is maybe what I might see as a 3.5 out of 5, which I think is kind of interesting in some cases. But I like how as of late, our even though we don't necessarily disagree, our rating scales get very skewed, which I think is kind of
Yeah.
fascinating to
I
see.
mean, I don't know. It's hard to really quantify that, I guess, but even though I guess there is a mathematical element at play, but
I don't know. For me, it's always
I
been a hunch, but even so, I think like the scaling is definitely a little bit different now. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really neat to see, like,
yeah,
in cases where we might actually find ourselves 100% in line, we might give
yeah.
it different numerical grades. I just think that's
Well, I
kind of
mean,
interesting.
in this case, I think it makes sense because I'm certainly higher on the filmmaking,
This time it
in those
does.
first 2/3. Yeah,
This time it does. But like, interestingly, as much as I really loved No Other Land, I think I gave that 3.5 on Letterboxd as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That to me, I think is borderline 5. That to me is
Wow.
one of the
Okay.
best films
Okay.
of the year. Yeah,
Gotcha.
no, it's a vital, crucial documentary that I think is one of the best films of the year, hands down.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Sure.
not even close. But, I mean, it's been a great year for documentaries, obviously, but
Hmm.
I don't think none better or more important than that one. So,
I think that's fair.
all right, let's move on from Brazil. Let's go ahead and move over to Germany. Let's talk about The Seed of the Sacred Fig. This is another film that is making the rounds this award season. It was nominated for the Palme d'Or. It won the Special Jury Prize. This is from director Mohamed Rusalov. And the filmmaking of this movie is interesting because a lot of it was done in secret. Rusalov had to flee to Germany in order to really finish the film and escape political pressures that were happening to him at that time when he was making this movie. And as I noted, this is one of those that is been talked about a lot for best international film. So,
Yeah.
what did you think about The Seed of the Sacred Fig?
Well, I mentioned during our discussion on No Other Land that there was another movie during this conversation that utilizes real footage, and it's this one.
Yes,
And the
yep,
way
this
it's
is it.
interwoven is pretty effective. And it's also interesting how we just got done talking about our skewed rating scales on Letterboxd, because this is another one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and I emphasize that grade kind of begrudgingly. I wonder if we're going to disagree on this one as well, JD. I am devastated that I only had to give this 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd for me, because I think the first two acts are the best movie of the year. I really think the first two acts are that good, especially given this one performance who I don't think is being talked about nearly enough, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Shohila Golstani, who plays the mother here, Najme. I think it's one of the best performances of the year, who has to find a way to navigate what is essentially a three-way conflict of doing what's right for her own beliefs, what's right for her family's safety, and what's also, quote unquote, right for her husband's occupational status as this newly appointed investigator for the Tehran court, if I'm getting that correctly. And I think that challenge is the most riveting part of the movie. It really is quite great. I don't love the third act. I don't love where it goes when it basically becomes a political chase thriller. I think it kind of devolves a little bit, if I'm being honest. And maybe there's just a bit of a repetition to it that I found a little tiring, if I'm being honest. But I do love that there is a familial dynamic at play that's kind of different for that type of, I guess, genre filmmaking. The first two acts were so good at keeping things completely rooted in domesticity. I guess I just wanted to stay there. I really did, because I think those first two acts, like I said, they're among the best. They're among the best of the year. I think they're that good. The movie is overall very good. I just wish it stuck the landing a little better for me.
Yeah, we are pretty much in lockstep here. I think that this film is remarkable in its first 2/3. It is a gripping domestic drama. It is a stunning allegory about cultural and political oppression. It is extremely well crafted. The performances are great. I love how the film inserts real life footage, as you noted earlier. That is so seamless here. It is incredible how the film is able to build around a series of events that happen in the real world and creating a fictional drama around it. It really is stunning how the film is able to coalesce in that way. And then you get to the back half, or really the final third of the film. Dramatically, I understand at its roots why the film makes the choices it does, but I do think it contrives it a little bit. And I agree with you, it becomes a little bit too chaotic. And I don't know if it does enough to make sense of Iman's choices. Again, fundamentally, I understand why he is overly cautious, why he's extremely nervous, and is desperate to find this gun. The MacGuffin of the film is he lost a gun.
It kind of becomes bicycle thieves, but with a gun.
It becomes bicycle thieves, yeah. But there's more political stakes.
Yeah, as opposed to familial hardship. Yeah, it's a very...
Exactly.
Well, kind of is, but yeah, I get it, yeah.
And because of those political stakes, I understand the urgency, but on the domestic side, it feels maybe a little bit too contrived to me. The film does set up that he doesn't have the best relationship with his daughters because he's always working and trying to provide. He's a little stoic. So the way he acts toward the end, it's not entirely out of bounds for the character, but I don't know if it always makes sense either. So I do think the film is maybe a little bit confused there. But at the same token, the way it brings the mother and two daughters together, I do think the film kind of makes up for that chaos with how it kind of explores that.
Okay.
So even though it's a bit chaotic, there's still things to appreciate about the daughters, their choices, and kind of how everything kind of escalates there. But I do agree with you that is ultimately where it does falter, is in that final third. Yeah. Otherwise, it certainly is one of the better films of the year.
Yeah, and that's why I say it very begrudgingly, because I think the potential was there for at least us to really respond to it more so than we do here. Even though I do think in that third act, between this mother and her two daughters, the character actions and their behaviors in that third act still make sense. I still think they're very in keeping with their respective characters. There is a bit of a wonkiness with Iman a little bit. I do agree with you. And I think that's less so on the writing or even that performance. I think it is more so with regard to Rosalov's direction and how it almost feels like he's really desperate to turn this into a movie by the end. That I think he kind of starts to lose sight of what really matter between these dynamics, and really just turns Iman into basically a villain in many ways, which you can kind of argue he always was, but there was always a bit of a bit of nuance in how he was internalizing his relationship with his family as opposed to his relationship with his government and his religion. And I thought that inner battle was way more interesting than the physical battle that we get at the end.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think where I somewhat find myself arguing for the film, even though I do agree with a lot of what you're saying, and ultimately I still don't know how well that final third comes together. But I do think at its core, the film is wanting to make a political statement, one, and two, it is acting as some sort of cautionary tale, and it is acting as a political allegory. So that extremism of the end, even though from a dramatic sense, it is a bit of a drastic turn that is jarring from the first two thirds, but under the guise of allegory, that extremism, it does kind of heighten that commentary. Now, maybe that disconnects the commentary from the drama. And, again, I don't know how seamless it is. I do question that. But maybe he wanted to emphasize that allegory more so than the domesticity of the drama. That could have been his case there. And if that's the choice, then I can't really blame him given the political tensions at play in the real world and what he's trying to comment on.
Yeah, it does make me think that maybe he was a little.
All work?
Yeah, maybe he was a little restricted in that way then.
Yeah, I'm not really too sure. It's hard to say. I know he's been making the rounds. I think we even have an interview of him up on the website, if I'm not mistaken.
I think we do.
And maybe he did speak to it. I can't really recall. It's been a while since I did hear that interview, but overall, I still think it's a very well directed movie. It's incredibly well performed, and it's still really good. I still quite love the film overall.
Yeah, I still really like it. If it sounds like I don't want to say I'm negative on the film because I'm not, but if it sounds like I'm more negative than I should be, it's because I saw what could have been one of the more masterful films of the year that lost that masterful quality at one point. I think the potential was there.
Mm-hmm. And I don't disagree with that. I think maybe that's where there's maybe some disappointment, but on the whole, for me,
it's still a good movie. It
doesn't detract from what's really great about it. Yeah.
Still overall a very good and crucial movie. And, even for its length, it's very well paced. Like I didn't ever find myself bored with this one.
No, I agree. No, it's incredibly gripping.
Yeah.
The characters are fully realized. Yeah, there's a lot to like about The Seed of the Sacred Fig.
Yeah.
All right, Brennan, let's talk about Ridley Scott. We love Ridley Scott. He's one of the best.
I love talking about this man. He is the most interesting man to talk about. What an interesting guy.
He is very interesting. He has a new film out. You may have heard of it. It's called Gladiator 2, starring Paul Mescal. And this is a film that is hitting digital. And we have digital codes to give away.
Yeah.
We have
and
5
guess
of
what?
them.
This movie's good.
And it's fun. Yeah, look, we often note in a very complimentary way that Ridley Scott is in his I don't give a shit phase. And
there's moments of that here.
Yeah, exactly. That's what makes Gladiator 2 so enjoyable. He just does not care. Doesn't care. We're throwing sharks into the Colosseum. We're building up a huge army for no reason whatsoever. It is just the best. So if you haven't seen Gladiator 2 and you want to check it out, well, here's perhaps a late Christmas gift, a late holiday gift that we could offer to you. Or maybe you're a huge fan of it like we are and you just want to win your copy of Gladiator 2. We have 5 digital codes to give away. Be sure to follow us on social media, especially on Twitter and X and Instagram, because that's how we're going to give these babies away. Be sure to follow us. You'll see a tweet later on this week that'll describe how we're going to give this away. It'll be similar to our Venom one. The Venom one went very well.
Yeah.
So we're happy that we were able to give those away. Gladiator 2. Be on the lookout for that later this week and enjoy yourself some Ridley Scott and Paul Mescal, making things happen.
Oh, what a fun movie. What a weird fun
movie. We do thank Gladiator 2 for their support. Again, follow us on social media for your chance to win a free digital code. All right, Brennan, let's talk about T-shirts and swag and how you can support us. This is one of the best ways to help us out is to go buy InSession Film gear. You can do that by going to the website at InSessionFilm.com/store, or you can go directly to TeePublic, which is where we host our merchandise. And you can go to tpublic.com/store/InSessionFilm. Up there we have a bunch of T-shirts and mugs and all kinds of things available. We have, of course, the InSession Film logo. We got Women in Session. We got Chasing the Gold. And then we have kind of some specialized designs. We have one for Midnight Special. We got one for Arrival. Vinny Villeneuve's Arrival is up there as well. We got a brand new one here from Almost Famous, which I really like.
Lester Bangs, baby. Lester Bangs
is really good. So we got all kinds of fun things up there. We got a Don't Turn Art into Sports one. That one I might wear on next week's show. Or
Man,
maybe I'll have to wear it for the award show.
There was a point where we were talking about that concept every weekend. And now we'll probably bring it up again now that the awards are coming into play.
Exactly. So we'll have to bring that up again. So we have all kinds of fun designs up there. Again, that's InSessionFilm.com/store, or just go to TeePublic at TeePublic.com/store/InSessionFilm. Get your InSession Film gear, and we thank you for your support. Okay, let's move on to the next film we're going to talk about here, and that is the comedy drama How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies.
Love that title.
And I know it's a great little title. This
title.
That little long title. This was selected as Thailand's entry for Best International Film at the Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and jump into this one. This one is interesting because I did not know much about it until some others started to catch up with it. And people were like, it started to create a little virality in terms of, oh my God, this is one of the better surprises, or people should check this out. It's not being talked about enough, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's mostly how I became aware of it here as we got to the end of the year. So, Brendan, what did you think about How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies?
Yeah, and given the synopsis of this movie, of how a young boy, a university dropout who is low on money and luck, basically wants to take care of his now cancer-ridden grandmother to hopefully profit on her home and her inheritance. Which I guess, given, Asian traditions, Thai traditions here, the film is very much steeped in these traditions of this culture. And the fact that so many of them maybe have this like competitive spirit to inherit what their family members are going to leave for them. Kind of a universal thing, I feel like. I will say the thing about this movie, it is by far the most egregiously manipulative, emotional thing this year, and I loved it.
Okay. Yeah.
And just to give you a sense of how manipulative that it is, I'm watching this at home. This is available on Amazon Prime, so I actually went and paid for the rental for it. My wife was not in the room with me. She comes in maybe past the halfway point, no context of what's happening, only sees some of the final scenes, and she's even crying more than me. It just goes to show how, like the musical score here is doing so much egregious heavy lifting to really try and pull an emotional reaction out of you. This movie is desperately trying to be a tearjerker, right? It's very simple. It's not reinventing any wheels, but man, is it sincere. It just feels like it comes from an honest and sincere place. And I love movies that have that kind of simplicity, that don't need to go for anything further. It moved me. It absolutely moved me. And sometimes I think one of the harder things to do is to tackle something that is so emotionally manipulative, but still make you believe it when you're as cynical as we are, right? Not to say that we're cynical, but we're certainly more cynical by design than, let's say, your average moviegoer, right? And the fact that it still worked on me, I think the movie is absolutely doing something right. It's directed by a first-time film director, if I'm not mistaken, Pat Boonatapat. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. Please forgive me. I know he's worked a lot in television, but I think this is his first feature film, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know the history or the story of why he chose to make this movie, but it definitely feels like his heart was in the right place and certainly had some type of real life experience to tailor towards this. And so it definitely feels very honest in that regard. So yeah, this is one I just finished watching a few hours ago in preparation for this episode, and it definitely left a mark on me.
Yeah, I do really like this one a lot as well. And it is interesting that it is a bit of a magic trick. There is a sleight of hand to this film in the sense that it is emotionally enthralling for sure. However, it is also one of the funniest films of the year. This
for
film
sure.
is
Yeah.
bitingly hilarious. And I love that duality here. I love the emotional core of it. And that's certainly going to be at play given the nature of the story. But my goodness, the dynamic between M and Minju, which is the grandmother and our central character who's taking care of his grandmother, the dynamic between them is often very, very funny. Even when things are at their most poignant near the end of the film, she's still cracking jokes. She's still rubbing him a little bit.
They're very bickery towards each other.
Yeah,
She's
like
more
it's-
bickery towards him for sure.
Yeah, like it's really, really great. And honestly, I haven't fully wrapped my mind around the category yet. I haven't finalized it yet. But Usha Simkum, again, forgive me, I am probably butchering that name, who plays Emju here, the grandmother who was diagnosed with stomach cancer. I think she gives one of my favorite supporting performances of the year.
Oh,
She
I agree.
might end up in my 5 for supporting actress.
And yeah.
'cause
And
she
guess how
is-
many movies she's been in?
This one.
2, including
2.
this one.
Okay.
And they're both from 2024.
Of course. Of course that's the case. But my goodness, like there is kind of there is an authenticity to it.
Yeah.
I don't know how they got this performance out of her, but it is crackling. It is really, really great. And I think another sleight of hand to it, and this somewhat speaks to what you're talking about, like the film isn't reinventing any wheels narratively. It's a clever premise. It's an interesting premise, but the tropes that fill up that premise are very familiar. And the film gets to have its cake and eat it too, in the sense that it obviously has a lot of cultural specificity to it, but because the tropes are so familiar, that the emotional truth of the film is very universal. And so that it's really interesting how relatable the film is, even if you have never experienced that specific dynamic before. So the film is working with these incredible dualities that are really invigorating here. And I guess ultimately why, I feel a lot about this film. There is a theme to me with this episode when it comes to How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies, The Seed of the Sacred Fig, I'm Still Here. There are aspects to these movies that I don't think are great, but they're so much beyond those flat moments that are so good that they, on the whole, become these really great movies that just compound to, all of the year-end homework that we've been doing, and it makes the year feel so much richer and fuller as a result. Those 3 movies are not going to end up in my top 20 at the end of the year, but they're all I give them all 4 stars on Letterboxd. I think they're all really good, rich, warm, or maybe not warm, but certainly rich and nuanced films that I deeply, deeply admire. Yeah.
And interestingly, I tend to go for more of the complexities of these types of movies. I think this film here, How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies, is perhaps the least quote unquote complex of the 3 international films we've talked about.
I agree.
Episode, and yet it's my favorite of the 3. This might actually end up in my top 20. I actually, but then again, I'm very fresh on it now. I only have a few hours removed from finishing it, so I'm speaking perhaps too prematurely. I want to let it sit and really marinate on my best of list until I know that answer for sure. But I do tend to respond to movies that have that simplicity and yet can still achieve a sincerity that doesn't feel, it's always going to feel manipulative, but when it's the right kind of earned manipulation, I think is a very difficult thing to pull off. And I think this one certainly does. As you were talking there, I was actually trying to find some interviews with its director. Again, going to try and pronounce his name, Pat Bunetapat. And there is one on InSessionFilm.com with our own Nadine Whitley. They had a great conversation there talking about his experience transitioning from television to feature film, and how it was directing Usha Simkun, as this was her screen debut, as they talk about. So absolutely fascinating stuff.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Love Nadine for doing that. That's
absolutely
incredible. There's so much content that goes on. I don't always have time to see it all.
Yeah,
but,
that's where Nini is the expert in telling us.
Yeah, Dave is incredible. Yeah, I love Dave for that. Oh, but yeah, that is really fascinating. And I do think this is a really great film that, as I said, it gets to have its cake and eat it too, despite how tropey it might be. It is very sincere, and the performances are really great. I cannot say enough good things about Usha Simkum. Again, forgive me, I'm butchering that, but man, she is so lovely here. She's so bright, so funny, and despite how tropey the characters and some of the drama might be, it's not void of nuance either. There is a conviction to the storytelling, and it does address those nuances. Like when it comes to M and what his motives are, it's not as if Mingju is completely ignorant of it. She is kind of aware of what his motives may or may not be, and directly addresses it at one point. And he has to confront it. At one point, he gets angry with her because he's uncertain as to whether this whole plot that he schemed up is even going to work. So like, as sincere as he ends up kind of becoming in the end, the film doesn't avoid how selfish his motives were throughout the whole thing.
Right.
Like, it does bring it up. So like, I do like that it does give space for those nuances to breathe a little bit, even if it does kind of play out the way you kind of expect it to. And there's a nice little twist at the end to kind of heighten that even more. So it's lovely.
It's so like it's so saccharine, but it's so sweet. It's so lovely.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful little movie. I agree.
Absolutely.
And one that maybe Brendan got more emotional at than I did. Who would have thought?
I'm trying to think of movies I saw this year that were the biggest quote unquote tearjerkers for me. I don't think there were that many from this year that I can think of, which is not to say it's a bad year. It's just like that's just a very particular type of reaction to have during a movie. This might be my biggest tearjerker of the year as I think about it. I'm guessing for you, it might be The Wild Robot.
Yeah, mine's easy to guess.
Didn't
take a whole lot. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is better than The Wild Robot. I'm just saying I may have had more of a tear-jerking reaction from this one.
I mean, it's a really good movie. It is really good. I didn't respond in the same way as Brendan did, but I was equally invigorated by the film, I guess. Like I didn't cry with it, but I was still moved even if I didn't cry. And I honestly, I think maybe I was more moved by anything by its humor. I think this is honestly one of the funniest films of the year.
That's true.
It might be the funniest film of the year.
I don't disagree with that at all.
Like, I've seen some great comedies, and there's something about the way humor is evoked in this film, because when you go to watch a comedy, it is blatantly trying to make you laugh, right? I mean, like in the same ways that movies like this might be blatantly trying to make you cry, you go to watch something like Babes or whatever, and those are brazen comedies. The humor in this film is much more organic. Like, it's not trying to...
I think that's what makes it funny, because it feels real. Like, it feels like real, natural conversation.
Yeah,
there's something really funny about that.
And that's what I love about the performance. Again, going back to, I think this might be one of the best supporting performances of the reel, because or performances of the year, because there is a realness to it. Like, she's like cracking jokes at M's expense, but doing it in like a lovingly grandma kind of irritated with you kind of way, as she's dealing with stomach cancer, by the way.
Yeah.
So like, all of these things are happening to her, but there's still such a pragmatism to the character, a realism to the character. Yeah. And maybe when you hire a non-actor to do that, that's all they can bring to it is their realness, because they're not trained in any other way.
It's very, very neo-realistic, I guess you could say. It is.
Very, yeah. Good stuff.
I like this movie a lot.
I like that film
a lot.
All right. The last film, as far as Brendan and I cross over, and then I have some others that I have watched individually that Brendan has not seen yet, but I still want to cover them since this is the last show of the year. We're going to talk quickly about the Cillian Murphy starred in, directed by Tim Milans. Again, forgive me for
I don't know how to pronounce his name, unfortunately.
I'm not sure either. The film is Small Things Like These. And this is also a Christmas movie, it turns out.
It is. That's a good point. Yeah.
So,
man, what is it with
watching
Christmas
this
movies? Yeah, what is it with these Christmas movies between this and Nosferatu being very dark? It's full of dread.
Full of dread.
Yeah.
So what did you think about Small Things Like These?
I think this will be one where we do disagree a little bit. I feel like a lot of what I had to say about I'm Still Here, I might be able to tailor to my feelings towards Small Things Like These. This movie is so modest, you might think it's about nothing at all, which I think is that's a very facetious way of saying how modest that the film is. Clearly, there's more going on underneath its centralized dread as you dig further. Admittedly, I did find the film maybe a little too modest at times, and I do think that director Tim Malance, is that whatever his name is, Tim Malance's use of long pauses to emphasize that dread, at times did feel a little manufactured for me. So I think that's really my only thing that maybe held it back from greatness. But then, much like a movie like I'm Still Here, good God, I could not take my eyes off of Cillian Murphy here. His sad stoicism is so good. His performance is good enough to render the flashbacks to his childhood almost inconsequential. But whenever he was on screen, I just could not look away. And that really made the movie for me. It absolutely did. But yeah, like I said, there are things about the filmmaking I didn't fully love, but everything I do love about this movie is all funneled through Cillian Murphy. It's just so interesting to see him giving a performance, not just a performance like this, but in a movie like this after Oppenheimer. I love the I love going from something so big to a small thing like this. I love how he does that. It's a really interesting transition.
You want to talk about a film that devastated me? This is a film that devastated me.
Wow,
I was broken at the end of this film.
Okay.
I loved it a lot. I think this is easily one of the best overlooked movies of the year. Same thing with Cillian Murphy's performance. Look, I understand he won last year for Oppenheimer, and this is a small, stoic little movie that is quiet and methodical. And how often do I talk about how those films resonate with me? So it doesn't scream awards, but you cannot convince me that's not one of the best actor performances of the year. Get out of my face. This film breathes and lives and dies off of that performance. I didn't really think about it in the context of I'm Still Here, but given our conversation on it earlier, you do make a really apt comparison there in terms of why I think this film is so effective, because its narrative is admittedly modest, as you were talking about there, and every lingering nuance and conflict and emotion that comes out of this film is born out of the camera insistently lingering on Cillian Murphy as he conveys that deep childhood trauma and this urgency to make peace with himself. It is haunting, those stoic looks he has throughout this film. Absolutely gutted me, especially when you couple it with those flashbacks to him as a child and the memories that make him who he is today as an adult, as a father, as someone who sees something so egregious that he feels the need to maybe do something about it. And not just because he sees something that may not be correct or moral. Honestly, his choices have nothing to do with morality. Could certainly be a part of it. He sees this young girl being locked up and treated unfairly. You're going to have some sort of moral response to that.
Yeah.
But mostly his decisions here are driven by how he was treated when he was young, which is why I think those flashbacks are effective. And the way that he ponders on his childhood. It is exactly why I come on this show, or in my real life, I scream this at the heavens all the time as well with my friends and family. They tell me to be quiet more times than not.
Yeah.
But I think there's something really, really special about childhood. It is such a unique part of your life, and not everyone has a great childhood. Cillian Murphy's character in this film does not have a great childhood.
Yeah.
But so much of what happens when we're young informs who we become as adults. And there's something blisteringly heartbreaking to me about what he experiences as a child and how that elicits this response of empathy as an adult. I was gutted by it, absolutely gutted by it. And I think that stoicism in Cillian Murphy and the way the camera lingers on him, I think is impeccable. It is absolutely astonishing. You talk about getting out of your way filmmaking. This is quintessentially that. It is the best form of it. And those close-ups, and they're not just close-ups. I mean, what we saw in I'm Still Here, you get these great medium shots on Fernando Torres, or even a couple of wonderful close-ups. We're getting extreme close-ups in this film of Cillian Murphy. And the ghostly, haunting qualities that he evokes, astonishing. It's
great.
For a quiet, small movie like this, it has Oppenheimer levels of resonance to them. It is like his performance needs to be talked about more. It is, I go back to, it is stunning that he's not in the conversation at all. I know he won last year.
It's politicking.
I get
it's
it.
The politicking of it.
It's the politicking, and freaking Matt Damon, who produced this movie, is not putting enough money into the awards campaign because
you would think
God,
he and Ben Affleck would have the money, but I guess
you
not.
think they would? Come on, Matt. Come on, man. Let's do this thing. Because I think it's awards worthy. I think he should be, especially given what he's up against. I think he should absolutely be in the conversation, if not nominated.
Yeah, I don't know.
Stunning performance.
I don't know if he'll be in my 5, but I do think he is that good to be in the conversation to at least consider it. I do think he is really good here. And when I said earlier in my opening thoughts for this film that his performance is so good that it almost renders the childhood flashbacks as inconsequential, that doesn't mean I think the childhood flashbacks should be taken out. I think they're still crucial here, but I said it there is to emphasize how good his performance is at also filling in certain gaps that the script is not necessarily required to give us. I think he is just so good at filling in all those gaps. And I think we should also note the historical inspiration for the story. This was based on a novel which I admittedly have not read. I'm sure you haven't read it yet either.
No, I haven't. No.
But this was inspired by, I guess, what are called the Magdalen laundries in Ireland, but they also extended between other aspects of Europe at that time, not just in Ireland. I think they were also found in England and Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. And basically,
it's very similar to what we saw in the documentary Sugarcane, which ironically is another film I could bring up here, or I think I did a couple of weeks ago. It might have been last week. Yeah. I think I talked about Sugarcane last week, and also Nickel Boys. Those two films tackling very similar things in terms of religiosity or schools maybe doing things they shouldn't.
Yeah, the abuse of its students for varying reasons, but in the case of the Magdalen laundries, it was the treatment of women who had, I guess, fallen from their religious upbringing, getting pregnant outside of wedlock is basically what it was. And the Roman Catholic treatment of these women of the time, especially here in Ireland, as depicted in this film, that's really the history that it's playing with here. There is one scene that really cues us into that between Cillian Murphy and Emily Watson, who plays Sister Mary, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Sort of the head of this particular convent. I'm curious what you thought of that scene. It didn't really work for me, if I'm being honest. And I guess because given how modest this film feels in totality, that scene just feels so abrasive and obvious by comparison, even if it is very quiet in a vacuum. You know,
Mm.
that one scene, I almost felt like, okay, this actually turned into a James Bond film, and now he's visiting the evil lair, and the villains giving their master plan. It almost kind of veered towards that kind of territory for me,
Okay.
and maybe just given the modest qualities of the film that's surrounding it. I think that
Yeah.
it maybe just more of a guilty by comparison kind of thing for me.
Gotcha.
But at the same
No,
time, I do I get why it's here.
now I definitely did not have that reaction, although I do agree with you. It is upping the ante in terms of the intensity of the film for sure.
Sure.
So it is a little jarring in that regard. The reason it works for me is one, this is the only interaction they have in the film, at least in a meaningful
true.
way, where Emily Watson is having to invoke her enforcement as far as her power goes. And that's something the film wants to reiterate, is that she has that power, which is why the townspeople pander to her and react the way they do. So having that moment of enforcement, I think, gives some dramatic credence. And I do think Emily Watson is having a great time. I wouldn't go quite Bond villain, but she's certainly, again, playing into the urgency of the moment. But the other reason it works for me is that I don't think it disregards its ethos, because for all of the acting, if you will, that Emily Watson is doing, Cillian Murphy doesn't say a goddamn thing. He is still very stoic.
Yeah, you're right. You're right in that regard.
Lingers on him, as we've seen in every scene in this film. The camera still lingers on him as he reflects and ponders and tries to convey what is necessary for that character in that moment without dialogue. And that is a big part of that scene still. Like, he doesn't react to her at all. I think he says 3 words and when he gets up to leave, and that's about it. And then it becomes more about his reaction, like an action that he takes on his way out in the aftermath of that moment. So I still think it works, given the context of what this film is about in terms of that dramatic urgency, but also what this is as an acting vehicle for Cillian Murphy and Bill's wrestling with his decision as it relates to this young girl. And Mother Superior certainly being the biggest hurdle that he has to face in terms of giving his choices consequence. Yeah, if that makes sense. Because if he just makes the choice, again, it's a little bit of that no other land thing we talked about earlier, where we can hear about Mother Superior and we can understand that she has power, and if he makes this choice, then there's going to be consequences, and look out for her. But if all we do is hear it and we don't see it, is there more power in the seeing than just the hearing?
Well, I think you're right. And that's why I don't necessarily think it's a scene you take out. That's not what I'm in favor of.
Yeah, sure.
If anything, it's really, you mentioned the word jarring. I do think there is a jarring quality given the confinement of the film that it's in. I think, if anything, there's a tonal mismatch happening that maybe I wish was a little bit more matched, if that makes sense. But I do agree that Cillian Murphy maintains a consistency throughout, even though that scene is more heightened by design. And I appreciate that he doesn't disregard that stoicism. He maintains it throughout the entire film. Even when things do get more heightened, he doesn't lose sight of that, which I do appreciate.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even in those final scenes after he makes this choice that is certainly going to have consequences. Like, I think that's what I love about that final scene. They walk into the house and he just kind of walks away. And she just kind of slowly follow. Like, he doesn't say anything. Like, he just, because again, this whole film is about him. It's not about him trying to be some sort of vigilante or have moral superiority. That has absolutely nothing to do with his choices, as much as he's trying to find some sort of peace with himself, given what his childhood was, and sacrifices that were made on his behalf, and some of the devastation that, like I still go back to like that moment when his wife is trying to talk to him and all he's thinking about is Christmas and the the lack of Christmas, I guess I'll say without spoilers, that he has as a kid, and you cut to him in the present day with the Christmas tree literally right next to him, and he's looking down like he's about to completely lose it, is one of my favorite scenes of the year. I don't know if it'll make my top 5 next week, but it's going to be in the conversation. I like that edit, like that cut, that storytelling. Again, it's a little bit of that Citizen Kane thing for me. Like, like you always go back to it, even in adulthood, whether you realize it or not. Like it's informing who you are in the present day, and the way this film tackles that, I just think is absolutely freaking brilliant, especially because of Cillian Murphy's performance. It's stunning, and look, I mean,
that's fair.
I can't recommend it because this film is methodical. It is very stoic. It is a slow burn
for everybody.
But man, those are my movies. Like those are absolutely my movies. I will take those any day of the week. Give them to me. I eat them up.
Yeah, makes sense, man. I'm normally with you, and I think there is a lot to offer with this one. I love how it cuts to black by the end. Leaves you on a bit of a sting of uncertainty. Weirdly kind of reminded me of how Juror Number 2 treated its just complete cut to black. With a similar level of uncertainty for different reasons and different ramifications, obviously. But I weirdly like movies that do that and commit to that level of uncertainty, and this one does it very efficiently, I think.
Absolutely. We're running a little low on time here, so I'm going to try to rapid fire through these next few that Brendan, again, has not seen yet, but I have. So I just want to note Paul Schrader's latest film, O Canada. I did not really like all that much.
Heard mixed things. Yeah. I'm
firmly mixed on that film. I loved his Man in the Room trilogy. It shares a similar DNA in terms of its reflective approach. This time substituting the pen for a camera, as it's about a filmmaker who in his last days is doing an interview of sorts. And he wants to talk to the camera. So he's addressing the camera throughout a lot of the film in the same way that the men would write in their diaries in the Man in a Room trilogy. But I don't think this shares the same sharpness or conviction. I think the film has a compelling thesis. It's anchored by 2 great performances in Richard Gere and Uma Thurman. But the middle, which is what is so great about the Man in the Room trilogy, here, I think, in O Canada is hollow. It's nothing but hot air and completely vacuous. It's a little, like, we've had this conversation before as well, as far as unlikable characters and what distincts those characters from being compelling versus just dreadful to get through. This is one of those that's just dreadful to get through.
Oof,
like I liked Bob Dylan in A Complete Unknown just being a complete dick, or Llewyn Davis, like the great characters, that are just assholes.
Llewyn Davis, there was a heartbreaking context to that.
Yeah, there's and that's been
justified his assholery a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of empathy to be had with Llewyn Davis for sure. I did not find that here with O Canada. Just insufferable. Again, like I said, kind of, it's just full of hot air. Did not really like O Canada all that much. Pedro Almodovar's new film, The Room Next Door. Similarly, maybe not quite. I do think it is lesser Almodovar. I think
been hearing that a lot.
Good, not great. Yeah, I mean the final third, it's a little bit of the antithesis to where we talk about with the Seed of the Sacred Fig, in the sense that the first 2/3 or the first half it leaves a little bit to be desired, and then you get to the back half when Julianne Moore and Tilda Swinton's characters, they get to this house, and then the film comes alive. Like that's where Almodovar finally starts to be Almodovar. And his use of color and the framing is excellent. Like, talk about an ending. This has a great final sequence. But I do think the first half of the film is a little distracted. There are these side topics that the film gets into that are simply here because Almodovar has, I guess like a political agenda he wants to throw into the middle of this film for whatever reason. Like I know it's weird. He just gets distracted at times. So I don't fully love it. But I think when it's at its best, it's really good. Unfortunately, that is mostly in the final third of the film.
No. And correct me if I'm wrong, this is his first English language film?
For Paul Schrader? Or for
no, for Pedro Almodovar.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes. That is correct.
Yeah. And I do wonder if if there may maybe some restrictions with that.
I'm not really too sure. I've seen some people bring that up in reviews, but I haven't really done enough research, or I haven't listened to a whole lot of interviews of him talking because again, there's so much homework that we've been doing over the last few weeks that
Fair.
I watched the film. I knew we weren't going to review it here on the show, so I didn't really do a whole lot of research into that. But I did see a few comments on Letterboxd evoking similar questions.
Okay, gotcha.
Did the English translation, I don't know, because I think that film is adapting a book as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yeah.
And it could be the adaptation part of it that kind of gets lost. Again, I'm not really too sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But for whatever reason, I think it's just a little distracted. But when it's good, it's good. Andrea Arnold's Bird is another one of those that I liked, didn't love, but there's such a great dynamic between the central performance of Nakia Adams, who gives one of the better young actor performances of the year. But she has this dynamic with Franz Rogowski in the film, and he's utterly delightful in this film. Really, really good. And I really like them together. They're absolutely fantastic. The talking point, and maybe this is worth having at some point down the line, there is a moment of magical realism at the end of the film that has polarized this movie. Hasn't worked for some.
Okay.
I kind of loved it. I almost got out of my seat. I thought it was really great. So that'll be worth talking about whenever you get a chance to see it. But I love the swings that Andrea Arnold is taking. I much prefer this to American Honey.
Isn't this the movie that Barry Keoghan chose and dropped out of Gladiator 2 because of?
I don't know. He is in the film, and he gives a really fun performance.
I think this movie is the reason why he dropped out of Gladiator 2.
I think it is. If that's the case, I really do admire him, because this is one of those where he's not center in this film. He's giving a supporting performance. He's in the film enough that it's not a cameo, but he's also not giving the richest of supporting performances. And coming off the heels of the film he did a few years ago, the name of it is escaping me. The big one where he gets all
Saltburn.
Saltburn, thank you. How could I forget the bathtub?
Like you can remember scenes from the movie, but not the movie itself.
I try to forget that movie. At any rate, coming off the heels of that and how wild and chaotic that was, this is a very different performance. Like he's this dad who loves his kids, but he's not the greatest at responsibility. One of those things, but he's
Gotcha.
really good at playing with that line here. But the reason he's here is like him and Franz Rogowski are cast here probably just to get this film made, because this is Nakia Adams's movie.
Gotcha.
This young actress, and she's really good. Barry Keoghan, I think if it's one of those, like, if he drops out, the film might not get made kind of thing.
It's like Michael Fassbender and Kneecap.
Yeah, exactly like that. Yeah, but he probably has a little bit more of screen time. Not a ton more, but certainly a little bit more.
Okay.
Anyway, I did like Bird. What else? The Girl with the Needle. I've seen this show up on a lot of like individual. This is one of my favorite international films of the year kind of thing.
Yeah. I've been hearing good things about this one.
This is an impossible film for me to talk about. It's a little bit of that Grave of the Fireflies thing.
Interesting.
It's a bleak movie. It is a devastating movie. Arguably too bleak. But I think given what this story is, it does need to show some of the things that it does.
Okay.
It's impeccably crafted. It is gorgeously shot. Wonderful black and white cinematography. The performances are fantastic. Just not going to sit there as one of my favorite films of the year because of its bleakness, if that makes sense.
Like it's just it's overly bleak to the point that it almost feels like it's just trying to be bleak for bleak's sake. Is it kind of is it that kind of bleak, or is it?
I wouldn't say that. I do think its bleakness has purpose here.
Okay.
Given what the story
there's
is,
merit. Okay.
There is merit to it, I think. I think it's just bleak in a way where on a personal level it is hard for me to grapple with.
Okay.
It's a personal thing for me.
Understandable.
So, I mean, one of those things that when you see it, I think you'll understand exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Like it won't take much thought for you to go, oh,
I get it. I see.
I get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So just a personal struggle for me.
Okay. Gotcha.
Actually, I was going to go in a different direction, but since we're talking about international film, let me talk about the Spanish film Close Your Eyes. Okay, so
oh man, I'm looking forward to this one.
The way that you were talking about how to make millions before grandma dies, maybe being in your top 20, that's where I'm at with this film. And this is where you watch these films at the end of the year. Now, we have another week or so before we do our InSession Film Awards, but I wish I would have watched this some months later so I had more time to grapple with it. Because if it doesn't make my top 20, this is potentially one of those films in 5 years I look back and go, what a moron. What an absolute idiot.
I love when that happens though. Like not you being a moron. That's not what I love. I love when we can go back and make those changes because a film just grows on you
It grows on you. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of that thing. Maybe this will be my boyhood of this year. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay.
Like I could see that being the case because I think this is such a powerful examination of cinema and memory and how the process of making art leaves you broken. But the images that we see on screen, there's something about how they reflect back at you that is so beautiful and full of life. And how that coalesces at the end of this film is breathtaking. It is one of the year's best endings for sure. And it's one of those where by the time we get to the award show, I hope I have enough time to sit on it because it is, and I urge you to see it as soon as possible in case you have a similar reaction to it.
Well,
that I did.
I was looking forward to this one, and I am going to try and see it this week in preparation for our not even award show, but also best scenes of the year. Primarily because the film's director, Victor Arise, I love his debut film, The Spirit of the Beehive, which I don't know if you've ever seen. And that was back in the 70s. He hasn't made many films, but that's the only film of his I have seen. I think it's quite good. So I'm always fascinated by filmmakers that have a very sporadic filmography like that. Like they really take their time, kind of like a Malick, right? They really take their time into crafting their films. And I'm looking forward to this one for that reason.
Yeah, it is really stunning. It is a really, really good movie. And there's a really good chance I've underrated it on Letterboxd. I've given it a good score, but I deliberately gave it the score I did because at this point I don't know. Like I don't want to overrate it in case I do land where I'm currently at. I'd rather underrate it and go higher than come down on it, I guess.
Sure.
Not that it really matters, but
No, I get it. I get it.
But that's like I was conservative with my rating now, but this is hovering. This is like right around my top 20, and who knows, in 2 weeks when we finally get to that award show, maybe it'll be close to my top 10. I don't know.
All right.
But I loved it. I really, really liked it a lot. And it's another one of those where the camera is doing a lot of the work here.
Gotcha.
The performances and the camera. Let me, I guess, be more clear. The performances are very good as well. So yeah, I really like Close Your Eyes quite a lot. And then The Fire Inside. So this is one of those movies that came out on Christmas, obviously. This is Rachel Morrison in her directorial debut.
I think so. Yeah, normally a cinematographer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, normally, yeah, really good cinematographer. And yeah, because I think I read something that, and I don't have it in front of me. Maybe I can pull that up real fast, because I read something where she did not do the cinematography on this film. Like, she had to relinquish it for whatever reason. This is obviously also written by Barry Jenkins. It's worth noting that Barry Jenkins wrote the screenplay to this. And it stars Ryan Destiny and Brian Tyree Henry. I think this film is a lot of fun. Again,
it looks like a fun
very familiar.
Drama.
Yeah, exactly. It's narratively familiar. It has all of the typical sports tropes, but it has a few subversions of its own that I do think are really interesting, especially in the back half of the film. It kind of makes its own story, kind of has its own little narrative there that I think is compelling. Still has its tropes, but like, again, there's some subversions there. Brian Tyree Henry is having a ball. He's having a lot of fun. I think he's really, really good here. Ryan Destiny with some great work as well. A nice little debut. I enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend, and Flint, Michigan, represent.
There you go. Okay. I honestly, I haven't seen this yet. This is one I'm definitely going to watch. I'm probably going to watch this one with my wife. I think she'll enjoy this one. But every time I see that poster, I keep thinking of what I think is one of the most underappreciated sports dramas of the past, like 10 years. You remember that movie First Match, directed by Olivia Newman, which also featured one Coleman Domingo as well as Yahya Abdul-Mateen II.
Oh man, yeah, I forgot they were in that movie.
I know, but every time I see this poster for The Fire Inside, I think of that movie because I don't. For some reason, I think they look kind of similar, even though they apparently depict different sports, right?
Yeah,
different forms of game. And
sure.
Maybe it keeps me going back to a movie like First Match, and I keep thinking, man, that should have been a bigger hit. That should have been a huge hit. But of course, it got buried by Netflix.
Of course, yeah. And The Fire Inside, I don't know how much it'll resonate into the culture, but I do hope people go and check it out. I think this is a nice little film. I really liked it a lot. I know you can definitely see Barry Jenkins, especially in the back half of the film. I think you really see Barry Jenkins come through more there, and again, these performances I think are dynamic. So I liked it. I definitely liked it. So.
Awesome.
All right, so that's where we stand as of right now. Again, sorry, I know we're kind of going a little long on this episode, but we had a lot of films to talk about. So that is kind of it as far as covering movies for 2024, with the exception of 2 other movies. We have 2 more reviews that are coming out next week. We're gonna do Baby Girl. Of course, we got to talk a little bit more Baby Girl. Yeah, and we haven't given a review for that. And we're also going to dig into Hard Truths as well. Yeah. So those are going to be our 2 reviews for next week. And then that'll round out, as far as films go, that'll kind of round out our coverage of the films. And then we're going to get into best scenes of the year on next week's show, as I said. And then in 2 weeks, it is the awards show. Part 1 and Part 2. And I think we can go ahead and note here that we are not going to be joined by Ryan and Jay this year, as much as we love and adore them. We are going to bring on the award show this year, one Dave Giannini.
Yep.
So he's going to join us, and I have it on good authority that Nosferatu is winning every single category, I believe is what he told me.
He has so much power, he's going to make us pick it as the winner for every single category as well, whether we like it or not.
Exactly. Doesn't matter the category, it's winning. Yeah, absolutely.
Thankfully, it maybe does deserve at least some love in some awards categories for sure.
Absolutely. All right, so with that said, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, please leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Letterboxd. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. Be sure to follow us on all of those platforms as well. Subscribe to the channel here on YouTube if you're watching here on YouTube, all that fun stuff. We really, really do appreciate it. I think that's it. Any final thoughts before we get out of here, Brendan?
Oh man, I still have so much to catch up with, and thankfully, since I'm still a little bit sick, I have some time to do so.
Yes.
Yeah. So for those either watching on YouTube or even listening, if you heard some rough patches from me, there are a couple times I even sneezed during this episode. Could not hold it back. But I'm making strides to get a little bit better. Hopefully, the Black Plague that Count Orlok put upon me eventually goes away. But it's definitely in the right direction.
Yeah, especially by the time we get to the award show, because that's such a, we love doing it, but it's a lot. So hopefully you're feeling better by then for sure.
Oh, I'm usually better after like 2 or 3 days, unless it's something really bad. Last year I dealt with a bad sinus infection that lasted almost a week. But this one so far has demonstrated it's not going to be as bad. Yeah,
well, that is good to hear. I'm glad you're feeling better. This was a fun episode. Again, we hope everyone had a great new year. Look forward to rounding out our 2024 campaign in the next few weeks. With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast.